Alright, a quick rundown on Dwarf Fortress and how I play. I'm not going to go into a Let's Play just yet. I don't have a lot of time for that. I wish I did. But I am going to cover some basics on how to get into Dwarf Fortress and how not to miss a good portion of what Dwarf Fortress is. For those of you who do not know or have never played Dwarf Fortress in many ways is kind of the violent intersection of SimCity, Civilization, and Dungeon Keeper, with a cast and crew of a bunch of chemically dependent and mentally unstable midgets. That's pretty much what it is. I guess it would fall into the genre of what we call a management game, but to be honest, Dwarf Fortress is more of a simulation than anything else. Gameplay has come secondary. And Dwarf Fortress comes in basically three different play styles or three different modes of play. One is an adventure mode. An adventure mode is straight up kind of rogue. If you don't know what rogue or NetHack is, you would be more familiar with modern versions of things like Diablo or Path of Exile. Those are rogue clones. And the idea is somewhat randomized world, go in, kind of power up and level up and explore a kind of a generated world. That's really what Rogue is at its base. So Dwarf Fortress has an adventure mode where you play a single guy and you go into this world that you've generated and interact with it. The second mode, which is what most people are most familiar with, which is Fortress mode, which is what we're going to cover, is basically you take the cast of 7 dwarves, settle an area, and try to stay alive. And it is a lot more tricky than you would initially suspect. But it isn't so much about winning. You can't win. It's more of finding creative ways to last as long as you can, and you can last indefinitely with a little bit of skill, but that gets very boring very fast. The three things that you're usually worried about is invasion by a foreign power, a tantrum spiral, which is the result of your dwarves being unhappy and pissing each other off until everybody's dead, and the third way that most people will lose is through choice. You destroy your own base, you dig too deep and too greedily, or you just get tired of it and abandon it. And the third mode, which is Legends mode, which we are going to cover, is basically just exploring the history, like a really big Wikipedia article network, if you would. And what we're going to cover here real quick is how I played Dwarf Fortress. And it is considerably different than a lot of people because it's more of the meta game to it. It's more of getting the fullest experience out of Dwarf Fortress, and we're going to cover that. And there's lazy noob packs and all sorts of things to get you set up, and there's plenty of other people from Captain Duck and others that can help you along with that. This is more covering the meta gaming of it, if you would. And we're going to cover that here live, and hopefully with my primitive video skills we'll get this rational and visible enough that you can kind of follow along. And the first thing I suggest people do is we're actually going to take a look at making a few small minor tweaks. And basically this comes about by making some changes in what are called the raws. The entire concept of Dwarf Fortress's engine, if you would, is that everything is built off of tags. So you would tag an animal as having X number of limbs, and you would tag a creature with having certain abilities or behaviors. And that's kind of what we're going to cover here. And these are the common changes that I make. And I will size this up here so you can see it. And I add trainable and pet to unicorns and giant desert scorpions. And you're like, oh, what does that mean? Depending on the objective or the theme that I'm going for, I try to build up my mountain home or the race or culture that I'm working with. And I go out to locations and I try to capture a particular creature, breed them and train them so my civilization can use them in war, kind of a thing. And one of the things that's fun to do is go out and try to acquire unicorns or giant desert scorpions as a potential type of livestock, if you would. The second is I add Sieger to goblins, and I remove shape from caps and chain leggings. And these are This will change in future versions, I'm sure, on what they do and how they go about it, but it's more of that third entry is a bug fix. And that's been done on my installation. How you would go about doing that is you go into your install, and you go into your Dwarf Fortress, and there's a raw directory, and there's objects, and then there's various files that you can edit to add or remove certain things. Another one that I tend to do, and I believe it's an entity default, these are your dwarves. These tags represent what a dwarf civilization is and what it's capable of. And down here, there's a section here that says ethics. And the ethics are what they're willing to do. And one of the things that a lot of people will change is these two right here, which is eat sapient other and eat sapient kill. And a lot of people will change that to acceptable. And part of that is so you can recycle your goblins, so to speak. You can make objects out of goblin bone, for instance, and if those pesky elves piss you off, you can make an elf bone earring kind of a thing. And a lot of people turn that on, and I tend to. There's all sorts of tags, all sorts of guides on the internet on how to work with this, and I won't get too heavy into that, but that's another common change. Now, once we get into Dwarf Fortress, the key thing is to, well, run it. And when you do, you're going to get this. This window over here, if you're using a lazy new pack, is for the DF hack module, which lets you do some bug fixes, cheats, other various things. And I'll show you one of the uses for that when you're starting out. I'm by no measure an expert. But let's see if I can get this maximized here and switch to capturing that window rather than the whole monitor. There, that ought to do. So when you create a new world, you're basically picking some parameters and stuff, and you can do it one of two ways. You can just use predefined templates or do a custom. And I tend to do a custom one. You can also just as easily use create world. I won't get into a lot of this. My profile is just abbreviated MRL for Mystic Realms of Lore. Long story there. And you hit enter. What's happening on the screen right now is the Dwarf Fortress program is trying to generate an entire, and by my estimate, it's a quarter of a planet. It's kind of a quarter sphere. It's not really a hemisphere, it's more of a quarter sphere. And one end of the map will be kind of the polar region, and then the southernmost part of the map usually ends up the equator, if you would. And sometimes it's flipped upside down. Sometimes we're in the southern hemisphere, sometimes we're in the northern hemisphere. And by the scale of things, at best it's either an eighth or a quarter of a sphere that's being generated. And there's weather patterns and rock formations, and it's a very in-depth simulation. And we're using a randomized seed, and it's going to try to make something that makes sense, that meets all the criteria. And if you tinker with your own custom profile, a lot of times you will end up specifying an impossible world and it will never move forward. Sometimes you'll get 80 rejects before you get a successful one, and you'll notice in the upper left where it says, so far 4 have been rejected because they didn't meet various criteria, and I would use the term sanity checks. The install that I'm using has a tile set, but if we look on here, we can see mountain ranges, rivers, some smaller kind of secondary rivers and streams. We can see forests, plains, hills. It gets very easy to kind of tell. There's sand. Purple is usually evil or kind of scary areas, and you'll see oceans of blood and lakes of blood and deserts of red sand and islands and little red crowns, which are volcanoes. And depending on how long you let the world run, which is where we're at now, you're building history. And right now, this is called the World Gen phase, and you'll hear a lot of people and the developer talk about World Gen activities. A lot of stuff is going on. Nations, cities, civilizations rising and falling. Dragon eggs have been laid in various locations and probably won't hatch. I think I usually cut out at about 500 years, but if you let it run to about 2,000 years, then you've got about, I don't know, I think last time I checked, maybe 5 or 6 dragons lurking around by then. there are monsters and ghosts and all sorts of things happening, and we'll see in World Gen, if we're lucky, as it pans the camera around the world, we'll see these little purple eyes appear. And those are necromancer towers, which means in the progress of history, a lich or a necromancer has come into power and has built a tower and is researching all sorts of dark, awful arts. Light bluish areas, those are like good aligned areas. Green and yellow are kind of neutrals, and again, purple is kind of evil stuff. And we can see some glaciers down here. At the bottom of the map, you'll see almost like a blackish blue background with little ice balls on it, and that's your glaciers and tundras and things of that nature. So we let the history run, and the history, depending on your computer, can take a really long time, especially once you hit like the year, I think it's like 120 or 130 is when things really start to chug. And that's influenced by the number of civilizations and what's going on. And you're getting a very rich history. I mean, people are getting married, born, die, civilizations, wars, all sorts of things. The problem, and what this video is to help correct, is people miss all that. They miss, especially in Fortress mode, in participating in that world. And I'm going to give you a technique that I use when I play that makes it considerably more interesting. So now we have 200 years of civilization here, and I can abort, I can accept. Just for the sake of this video, I'm going to accept a relatively short history, and it's going to kind of write out the game world and all of that information. Why is this important? Well, one of the problems when you play in the game and you just kind of jump right in is you miss a lot of context. And context is important, especially if you want to enjoy the game more. People get frustrated when they lose the game, but there is no lost condition. Your particular game session or your particular fortress may disappear, but that's just another page in the history that's being generated. So rather than looking at it as defeat, you can look at it more as that's that civilization's history and you're contributing to it. So their mountain home has had a loss or a defeat. And what you can do very easily is build your own kind of thematic story, if you would. And which is something that we're going to do right now real quick here, and I'll show you. And one of the tools we're going to use, oddly, is Microsoft Word. It may seem odd, but that's in fact what we're going to actually use. And I'm going to switch this back to monitor capture here, and I'll clip out those. There we are, back over here. And we're just going to fire up Microsoft Word, provided I can find it in my mess of links and Lord knows what else. Microsoft Office, here we are, Microsoft Word. You can use OpenOffice or anything. It's just a tool that we're going to do. And we're going to document a couple things here for you to take a look at. One, my civ, king or queen, home region, target region, river or brook, fortress name, and the staff, the actual dwarves that are going to come with. And we're just going to set that up. Take a look. These are some key information pieces we're going to go and grab here real quick to get an idea of who we're going to represent. So rather than looking at the game as a particular session or fortress, we're going to be playing the entire civilization. And to do that, we need to go in and extract the history. Here are the three modes that we have. We have Dwarf Fortress, Adventurer, and Legends, and we're after Legends. The Legends is basically an XML export of all of the history of the world, 200 years worth. And we're going to kind of do a couple steps here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit P, Export Map Gen Info. And what that does is it just exports out a little file to help us along in using a particular tool, which is the Legends Viewer. Then we're going to go D. and we're going to export a more detailed map. Standard biome plus sitemap. It's going to go through and it's going to extract and export a bunch of information on civilizations and maps. It's very boring stuff, but what we're actually doing is we're taking our world that we've created, completely unique and generated from a random seed of some sort, and we're going to find out what has happened. What's the story so far in that first 200 years? And we're going to participate in that story. Rather than just jumping into the game world, we're going to actually take an active role in it. So now I've hit X and I'm doing the XML dump, which takes a while. And the trick I always do is I always click on the screen and it kind of goes that program is not responding gray for a bit. And that simply gives us a visual indicator of when the process is done. And again, depending on your computer and your specs and things like that, it can take quite a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk over to my coffee maker and start a cup of coffee starting while we're waiting. Hi, little bud. There is a small dog in here. His name is Walt. And he is very glad that you've taken time out of your day to take a look at this video. As am I. And I think today we're looking at Green Mountain Coffee Breakfast Blend. That'll work. Love my Keurig One Shot. So, our process is now complete and we now have that information available. We're done with Dwarf Fortress for now. The next tool that we need is Legends Viewer. What is the Legends Viewer? The Legends Viewer is another outside tool that will let us inspect what we've just exported in a much more easy to manage way. So, I'm going to close that. I'm going to see if I can grab just the screen. That looks like crap. I think I'll just do the whole monitor. There we go. And we're going to import that stuff in. So, the first thing we were asked is what file are we going to take a look at? And we are going to find, and I believe it is XML region 1. Here it is. And it fills in everything else for us. And we want world with the one we created today, which is on 2.5, and I believe it is the region 1 graphic one. So this tool is going to import our history, and we'll be able to kind of browse it like a almost like a Wikipedia page. It's not like a linear novel. There's no narrative that we can really kind of latch onto, but we can see all of it in kind of a very flat style. So here is our world, and here is the civilizations that exist. And we will scroll through a little bit of this. Hopefully the video quality is enough where it's easy to read, but we have 4 beak wolf civilizations, 4 dark stranglers, and 4 dwarves. And since we're playing dwarves, this is the area that we're kind of interested in. The stockade of ferns, the anvil of growths, the rumored arena, and the heavenly glazes. These are our 4 dwarf civilizations that we're going to pick from. Again, we're not going to be passive in the story. We're actually going to try to participate. So we come back to that Word document, and remember we have all these key informations here to help us flesh out our gameplay. So let's take a look at our dwarves and see which dwarf civilization we want to represent. So we come over here to the Stockade of Ferns, and we're going to click on that. Here is the Stockade of Ferns and where they exist on the map. They're towards the top. They've got a couple civilizations. They've had 3 kings in 200 years. And the current king, or queen for that matter, it's hard to tell with these names, is Cog Workmarked. So we have a civilization here, and we know that they're currently at war with the Roasted Conflict, which that's the name of the war, and it's against the Frilly Wickedness, which is a civilization of putrid Blendex. This gives us an ability to kind of have a much more visceral interaction with our world, because when we're going to go into the game, we're part of whatever civilization we pick. Now, the question is do we want to really be working for Cog? Let's take a look. Cog is female, a siege operator, and has 10 events. We click on Cog, and what we find out, first of all, is Cog is a goddamn vampire. Yeah, that's right. The king of the Stockade of Ferns is a woman. Wouldn't that make her a queen? Well, we'll just write that off as just bad procedural grammar. The queen of the Stockade of Ferns is Cog Workmarked. She was born in the year 41, and she's a vampire. Joy. Her mother was Sodel, her father was Keeb. She's got some deities behind her that she's had, and she has some history. And this is kind of how you have to piece the story together in your head. So, she has one kill. She killed a Blendek. She hasn't started feeding on anybody in her own, civilization yet. But do we really want to be working for a civilization such that our leader is a vampire? So we click back. So we can go back to our civilizations and let's look at the second one, which is the Anvil of Growths. They're on their 5th king. He's been king, it looks roughly by, 50 years. They're currently fighting 4 wars against the Belch Crystal, which again are those putrid Blendeks. They've had 39 sites. In other words, there's 39 cities or fortresses out there, and there's 16,000 dwarves in the civilization. You can browse through their history, and this is incomplete, and this game will probably be complete in 30 years, but it gives us something to work with. So let's take a look at Ast Mindwhipped, who is our current king or queen, for that matter, of this place. Ast Mindwhip was born in 56. He's male, he was a furnace operator, and he has a goal of immortality. Believe me, rulers seeking immortality ends in one of 2 ways. They end up a vampire or they end up a lich of some bizarre, freakish reason. He has 2 kills to his name, and relatively, simple. It's very straightforward. You kind of browse through these and get a feel for them. And when you generate a world like Wikipedia, if you're into this, you can spend hours kind of clicking through like, hey, I wonder what happened in the roasted battle. Well, here's the roasted battle, and here's everybody that died in it, and here's all the battles, and so on and so forth. So, again, you can really waste a lot of time. So the Anvil of Growth looks like a good place to hang out. Let's take a look at the Rumored Arena. They are losing. They had 11 sites, and they just lost their last site to the Squashed Shark. They're on their 17th king. Yeah, these guys are really getting slapped around. And he's a vampire. So, the Stockade of Ferns and the Rumored Arena are run by vampires. Great. Let's look at the Heavenly Glazes. Let's see here. 3rd king, 1 war, a lot of deities. Lickdock, I'm wagering he's a vampire. Wow, he's not. Male, shearer, and a king. Not too bad. 3 unnotable battles. By and large, relatively boring. And the longer you generate history, the much more interesting this gets. So, but in this particular case, because of the timing of the video, I didn't want to spend too terribly long. I'm thinking that we should probably work with the Anvil of Growths. So, we come back over to our Word doc here, and we're going to just jot some things down. One is we are going to be the Anvil of Growths. Our current king or queen is Ast Mindwhipped. And that's a he, if I remember correctly. Yep, he's male, so he's a king. So we can come back to our Word document, and we'll go king Ast Mindwhipped. And we want to double check and make sure we don't have a queen necessarily. He's got a couple kills. He married Zephon Seafrill. Is Zephon Seafrill still lived? No. The queen was effectively, our story reads, in the year 100, in the battle with Zast Tastruck, the Rites of Perfecting, Zephron was struck down by the Colossus. So our queen was killed in battle. This is the stuff you miss if you just jump into the game and go forth. So this gives us a lot of interesting information because is Zas still alive? And no, Zas was struck down by a werewolf. And that's just a glitch that comes up periodically. It's not the most stable program in the world, but Queen was killed in battle. Okay, so I'm going to fire that tool back up here. We'll get that all back up and running here, and we're going to continue on and kind of get our rough outline of what we're planning to do. So back to Legends Viewer, fire that up, pick our XML, which is region 1, map image, world graphic region 1, and loading. The reason we do the Word document here is we're going to journal our gameplay. Specifically, I just journaled the first 7 dwarves because once there's 200 people, hell, once there's 20 people, it becomes really cumbersome and a kind of a pain in the ass. It would be really great if we could get like a live feed out of the game, and we could feed it to a web page or like a Drupal site or something to kind of blog what's going on in the world, like a newspaper almost, every season or month getting that. But, so the queen was killed in battle, and Anvil of Growths, and I just want to grab the queen's name here real quick just because that strikes me as really, really interesting for a plot point that we can work with. So this is kind of like doing a little bit of writing, if you would. So, queen was killed in battle, and the dwarf Zephon Seal Frills by the Bronze Colossus, and we'll pull her information back up here. Bronze Colossus, and let's see here. There it is. Zas Take Assault. Vengeance was denied to the king and the werewolf. And we'll just pull his name out for the fun of it here. And that was by the werewolf. Ozo sensed clobbered. Yeah, sensed clobbered. So we just make a note of that there and we move on. So the home region is the next big question, and that comes back to show map, and let's go back to world stats, and we're going to pick where the current mountain home and stuff is, where we're coming from and where we're going. And the site history here looks like Risebolt is where we originated from. We'd have to kind of keep digging through here and see where the current mountain home is. The easiest way to do that is to go find the king, read his settlement issues. So he settled in oil squeezes, asked became an unknown job, and Cujal swallowed. So the mountain home followed the king to Cujal Swallow, and that looks like settled in Risebolts. So we know that our home region then is, or our home fortress is Risebolts. Now, the question is where the hell is Risebolts? Well, let's see if we can click on it. There's Risebolts. It's on, it looks like the coast. Yep. And let's see here. Looks like it's been attacked 8 times, got some deaths. Let's see here. So we got the whole site history of that particular fortress, of what's happened there and all of that interesting stuff. So the question is where is Risebolts? And it looks like, and by the way, its actual dwarven name would be like Lacuna Lath or something to that extent. We're reading kind of the English translation. So let's go and see if we can find that on the map here, which should be relatively easy. We can zoom out. And we know it's way down south, and it's near the coast somewhere. We can kind of mouse over. So there's goblins there. And this must be what we're looking for here. The Anvil of Growths. This is Adlosan, Tobulgan, Bresmadaran. And we're looking for Risebolt, which there's Oil Squeezes, Bolt Drag, Girder Mains, Craft Potent, Trumpet Steel. Body Burst, Flag Chawl, Tax Gem. There's Rise Bolts. So we know where Rise Bolt is. We don't know what region we're necessarily in. And that is kind of a catch-22 here. And it's Rise Bolt here. AKA Lacuna Lath. We'll go into the game later and we're going to try to figure that out. And we should do that now here. And we're going to go start playing Dwarf Fortress. And we're going to get into some of the other stuff here, but I want to just kind of show you the process of trying to figure this out. So we know that Rise Bolt is way down here somewhere. Roughly in here. And there's like Kubukish and looks like Selduthan and other various locations around here. Fikmati, and there's Lacuna Lath. So there is Rise Bolt. So there's Rise Bolt on the map, and it's in a glacier. Yes, our mountain home is in the middle of a glacier in a region called the Sunny Blizzard. The influential point looks like that's the name of the mountain range. And then the Sunny Blizzard appears to be the glacier name. So the glacier, the Sunny Blizzard. Interesting to say the least. But what this does in Sunny, what do we call it here again? The Sunny Blizzard. And the Sunny Blizzard. I'll use the European glacier. I prefer just glacier because I'm from Minnesota, but whatever. Near the, and we had determined here earlier that this mountain range was the influential point. Mountains. There we are. And that gives us some context on where we came from, and we're going to get into where we're going. Now, they come here, and we're okay. Deep metals, slug stones, and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of information. We'll get to that here in a minute. But what we're really just after is what kind of information we've got there. So we're going to come back out of this. We are done with this for now. Abort. And we're just going to kind of get a vibe for the story that we're trying to set up here. And one of the ways that we do that, as we maximize this map, is we see who's near us. What story is emerging? Here's those putrid Blendix, the belch of crystals. There's another group over here. Who is this? This is White Tigerman. White Tigerman to the south. We've got some dwarves of the Rumored Arena over there to the east. We have goblins, the Curled Evils to the west. Wow, we have one little blotch of White Tigerman there. We have the Confederation of Inks, which is some humans up here. And basically in our head, we're just taking a look at what's around us and where we might want to go and what story is written in the process. So if I wanted to say I want to, in my Dwarf Fortress game, I'm interested in a desert area, and I come up here towards where it's, scorching hot and there's deserts and whatnot, I have to think in my head what story gets written in the fact that I have to go through all of this other stuff along the way and all of these other regions. So think of your Lonely Mountain from The Hobbit. All right, my Lonely Mountain, if it's way the hell up here, I got to go through all of this crap in my head on the story and how my dwarves get there. So that's part of how we're pulling out more context and story to kind of give us a background. You don't have to do this your first 20 or so games because you're probably going to go somewhere and die immediately. It's just the way the learning curve of the game. But later on, when you get a little bit better and you want to kind of help shape the history of this world, then this stuff becomes more interesting, because if you want to start a war with your dwarven civilization, I should settle over by the humans and see if I can get a human caravan over there and piss them off and then execute all of the caravan owners and start a war, and then I can switch to a different civilization and then continue to shape that history. So there's a lot of opportunity for that. So going into Dwarf Fortress then is site selection. Where are we going? And that's our next item here, which is target region, but we'll get to that here in a second. So we come back to Dwarf Fortress, and we're going to say start playing Dwarf Fortress. All right, where do we want to start? Where do we want to start our game? What do we want to do, really, ultimately, in the game itself? And I'm going to switch to just that window so it's a little bit cleaner. Well, the first thing I suggest is hit the F key for find. And what this is it's going to help us narrow down where we want to go and what we want to do. For starting, I would start with low savagery and low evil. That's going to get you all sorts of nice, good areas that are pretty easy to manage. I do not recommend that. By and large, I suggest medium. That's going to be the most realistic, where you have bears, but not giant, ravenous humanoid bears. You're not going to have demons on your front doorstep, but you're also not going to have rainbow bright unicorns hanging around either. So, depending on how you want to go, savagery is kind of I would say, how big an animal gets. When savagery is low, you have a cute little beaver. When savagery is medium, you might get the occasional giant beaver. When savagery is high, you're probably looking at giant mutated beaver men who are going to kill all of your dwarves, kind of a thing. It just depends. For the sake of this video, and if I ever get some time scheduled to do a Let's Play, we'll just go with medium with a high savagery. The reason I like a high savagery is when I like capturing animals and breeding them and training them, I like the opportunity to get a giant tiger. There's nothing more entertaining than have a pit of like 200 giant tigers and then sacrifice, goblins to that pit, kind of a thing. That's where I kind of get my kicks out of it, is finding unique ways to torture poor invaders. Elevation, temperature, stuff like that, it really doesn't need to worry about all that much. I have aquifers disabled, I think, just because it's just more hassle, and the amount of time I have to play, I just don't have time to deal with the aquifers. But you can say like aquifer no. Whatever sites are selected, no aquifer. For those of you who've never played the game, aquifer basically means there's going to be a couple layers of the world that if you dig into it, floods with water. And they are very tricky to get around. So I would say no for now. River, yes. We want some kind of water source. Stream, brooks, rivers, whatever. Shallow metals, I would say multiple. Deep metals, multiple. Soil, you can leave it. Clay, you can leave it. This just determines how much, little, some, deep. When you have non-applicable, it means it just doesn't factor into the search. So we hit enter, and again, depending on your computer speed, what it's going to do is it's scanning the map, and it's going to highlight in green any locations that fit our criteria. Which, if you see up there, again, high savagery, medium evil, aquifer, fluxstone, that kind of stuff. What is fluxstone? Basically, you need flux-stone to make steel. If you have iron and no flux-stone, you cannot make steel. You need that flux material to get your steel production up and running. And it's usually either in the form of like chalk or marble or things of that nature. And again, there's a lot of wiki information on that. Depending on how much of a challenge you want, this criteria could drastically change. I know people that want, high savagery, evil as all hell, and the first thing they do is they build a roof, dig down, and then they seal themselves off from the outside world for a couple hundred years. It just depends. And I would say for your first year of playing this, you're probably not want to set foot in anything remotely purple. There have been exceptions to that, but for the most part, no. Once you have undead on your map, it gets pretty bad pretty quick. So, and then we won't even get into the circus, but you'll hear references to the circus. I won't give spoilers. That's why we use the term circus and clowns and cotton candy. But just hold true to the Dwarven creed. Don't dig too deep too greedily, or you may find the circus. So, again, depending on your computer speed, this can take a long time. On my older computer, this took almost a half hour. On this one, it runs considerably better, enough for padding out a video time and giving us kind of just some general referencing. So you can see, remember, our dwarf civilization that we picked is way down in the southern area here, in the southern left of this rightmost map. It's a zoom is what you're looking at. The one on the far right is the first zoom out, and then a zoom in, and then another zoom in. So, but if you look, we have few options down by us. We're heading north, basically. And remember, we have all the story of what happens in between. And you can be as detailed as you want. You can be as undetailed as you want. In fact, you can even go into adventure mode and walk from your area and see what actually is going on there and contribute to the history that way as well. I know a lot of people that have gotten better with the game. They'll play 4 or 5 characters in adventure mode and kind of contribute to the history, and then play fortress mode. And then the cool thing is you'll find that your dwarf might go crazy or make an artifact in memory of one of the adventures that you had played. It might recount the battle between one of your adventures when you killed off a particular famous Cyclops, for instance. So it depends. So now our search is done, and we have a bunch of flashing squares that are horribly colored because I happen to be colorblind, and telling the difference between where the cursor is and where it isn't can be problematic, and I am too lazy to change the color scheme. But if we look over here and we hit escape to browse results, and I'll move the cursor. If you look over here, and I should have mouse cursor here, that's where our current map is. So that's what we're seeing up here. That's the zoom in, and we can also see it over here. And what we're doing is we're looking at all these different types of X's. Now, for me, I tend to look for a tropical broadleaf forest. It's got the highest number of critters that I'm looking to tame. The problem is that tropical broadleaf forests are way up here in the north half of the map, and usually it's pretty hard to get what you really, really want. You can go through 100 world gens and not really find what you're looking for, and I gotta find my cursor here. There it is. Okay, so let's see. This is a tropical broad dry. I want tropical wet. Now, if this is dry over here, usually on the opposite side of a mountain is where it's wet. And yeah, I'm not getting any luck here. So if I can't find a tropical moist broadleaf forest kind of a thing, then I default to just a coniferous forest, which is again more temperate and a little bit easier to find. Let's look at this chunk up here. What do we got here? This is temperate, coniferous, untamed wild, thicks. If you look in the upper left, you'll see some of the information that we're kind of after. You'll notice there's a little kind of where my cursor is now, there's like a little gray rock. That's actually a cave, which means there's something nasty living in there. And then if we look over here, there's also a nasty purple blob of a mountain here, the Crest of Ash, which is a terrifying location. So if we're looking for a lot of drama and interest, settling somewhere in here might actually be kind of fun. Just because who the hell knows what's going to crawl out of the cave and come find me, and who the hell is going to be in the mountain range and come find me. It could be very interesting. A lot of times, though, you'll want something that borders two different biomes or types of environments. So we're coming here, and this is temperate coniferous forest, and this one's a freshwater swamp. And if we look down in our lower left down here, we'll see where it says F1, F2 view biome. If I hit those two, we get the two biomes. So up in the upper right, the mire of scintillating and the umbral jungles. So if we were to settle here in this particular map chunk, if we look in the upper left, that's up in this area here, this is the stream, the rabble of bases. That's the rabble of bases here. And this would be our map that we'd be playing on. And we would be partially in the mire of scintillating and partially in the umbral jungles. And there's a stream that says, again, the rabble of bases. So we come back over here. This looks like a good of place as any. And I just move this over here. Target region. We are looking at, and you could put both of them in here, but I'm just going to say the umbral jungle. Umbral jungles. River or brook is the stream, the rabble of bases, and then the fortress name and the staff. Well, how does that play into this? Well, if I'm going to bring my characters up here, I'm going to have an entire story to kind of go through. But I'm going to mark this first. So I'm going to go N for notes, N add a note, and I'm going to say my fortress 1. My fortress 1. Now, a lot of times what I do is I do A through G. And I say, well, I'm going to pick, like 5 or 6 potential sites. And I'm going to explain to you why here in a few seconds on how this goes about. And I really should kind of, there we go. Okay, so there we are. And now why do I do this? Well, the main reason is we have this thing back here, if you remember earlier in the video, which is DF Hack. And DF Hack has a great tool which is called Prospect. And we're going to do Prospect All. What this does is this gives me, before I even settle this map, a rough idea of what kind of minerals and wealth are there. And looking at this, it's telling me that in those two biomes, I've got silty clay, some peat, loam, claystone, schist, granite, marble, all sorts of fun stuff with various different metal types. Okay, fine. It doesn't give me an exact because it's a rough estimate based off of the type of soil and things like that. Well, the reason we mark this, and we're going to come back to it here in a second, is we're not going to actually settle here. But if you look at the map, we now have this blue exclamation mark permanently on the map. That won't save until we settle somewhere. So we're just going to randomly grab a spot, literally in the middle of nowhere, like right here. And we're just going to embark here, which means to start playing. And we're just going to hit play now. You're like, well, why do that? We don't care who we are, and we're going to immediately abandon the fortress. Why do we do that? Because it saves that note. And if you're like me and you do 12 different potential sites that you want to pick from, that makes a lot more sense, because I'm going to go back to each of those markers and do something here, which I will show you in a second. So it saves the world and it advances the world gen time a few years. I think it's maybe 2 or 3 or something like that. But we're going to go back to start playing. We're going to go back to Dwarf Fortress, and our site that we picked has been saved. And you'll notice right there on the map, we can see the blue flashing exclamation mark. So we can kind of navigate over to that and find our site that we had picked earlier without having to go through and do a whole nother search and do all of that jazz. And I can just kind of move my selection up here, and boom. Now I can embark. And I do not have save initial set up, so I really don't care about all this stuff just yet. But now I can come back over here and I can do a prospect all. And this tells me exactly what's on the map. And what I would do is I would write down like what kind of ores and stuff are on the map in a quick way to pick out of those, let's say, 12 sites that I was planning on. This one has magonite, it has tetradite, sapphirite, limonite, galena, it's got adamantium, it's got platinum. So it has everything that I'm really looking for steel that I can use, which is great, you know. And then we got to check and see what other type of materials that we have. And just looking through it, you know, I have plenty of soil, stone, water, magma. I got clay. I got siltstone, claystone. I have plenty of marble. There's 151,000 units of marble on this map. So I'm okay there. That's my flux material that I can use to turn the iron into steel. So that's a good site. We'll use this one. And then I just tend to hit die, which immediately kills the program. And then I just go back in. So that's the place that I'm going to hang out. That's the fortress that I'm going to settle in. So I can go in and start playing, and I'm going to go right back to that same location, and I'm going to get everything set up here to actually sit down and play the game. So a couple things are going to we're going to end up keeping track of here. So we're going to come back over to our map, and there's our site. And we just do this process and come over. And I hit embark, and now I'm going to be, I forgot a process as I'm trying to hurry through this. I'm starting to get ahead of myself. We have to make sure we're picking the right race and stuff for our story. So we're going to come down here, get our site all lined back up again, and we're going to hit tab a couple times to make sure we're picking the right civilization. We want the Anvil of Growths, and we can see in blue down in this area here our civilization. There's all their little fortresses, and there's probably the one that we came from and stuff like that. And here's all of the stuff up here that we're going to be taking a look at here. So we've got the Anvil of Growth set up. We're doing good. We hit embark, and now we can do a lot of different things. You're going to see a lot of tutorial videos on how to set up your initial party, and that really isn't really crucial to what we're doing in this video, but it's kind of, it'll help you. No gypsum, no fish, no cave lobster, don't care. Alright, so come over here, and new lobster is still bugged, whatever, I'll add that back in. Ton of lobster. Now before we hit embark, this is where this other two entries are coming from. The fortress name and the staff. We can let that randomly generate if we really want to, or we can give it a potential name. If you want to, this is where you would do that. You can name the fortress and name the group. That's the squad's name of all the guys that you just sent. And that's one thing that we're going to cover here. And I don't know if I actually threw that in there, but that should be really here, group name. And you can just hit R a couple times. Wire of Tongues, the Blameless Boat, the Balanced Urn. That works. So we're going to say, what was that? Neth Vakar. The Balanced Urn. Okay, and we're going to say, yeah, we'll go with that one, Nevercur. And fortress name, we can do the same thing. And I look for ones that sound interesting to pronounce in the native rather than just whatever the translation is. So we'll go with that one, which is Stack Who Cat. Stack Who Dat. Stack to Cat? Stack. Actually, we could go Sta Cood Cat. Stakud Cat. Yeah, Stakud Cat. That D and the K there is kind of iffy. I don't know about that. It's hard to bring up in a conversation. Yeah, mass intercrast. Yeah, there we go. Let's try this one. This one's a little bit easier to pronounce here. How about this one? Cadolinash. Cadolinash. There we go. Which is the hatchet organs. Hatchet organs. Great! It's always a lovely sounding place. And then the staff we'll get to here in a second. So then we hit embark. Okay, after you have arrived after a journey from the mountain home in the forbidden wilderness beyond, your harsh trek is finally ended. Your party of 7 is to make an outpost for the glory of all of Zuntirbal. There are almost no supplies left, but with stout labor comes sustenance, whether by bolt, plow, or hook, providing for you and your dwarves, expecting blah blah blah. Kaladesh, hatchet organs, strike the earth. Okay. This is the bulk of what we're about to do then. We'll notice that we can look at, let's say, I don't know, we can look at our various stockpiles and things of that nature, but we can also see the time. It is the first granite in the year 202 early spring. So, first granite of 202 early spring. Now I have 7 dwarves, and these 7 dwarves I can view. We can go unit, and here are the 7 dwarves that I'm starting with here. So we have, and I just stick with first names for the most part, Mezbuth, Urist, Besmar, Sodel, Rigoth, Lore, and Udil. Now, I should switch this to full monitor capture so you can kind of see that as I fill that out. And what this gives us is the ability to kind of get some personality behind these. So I end up going in here and I go to this screen and I can go view creature, enter thoughts and preferences. And what I'll do more often than not is I shrink this down to something a bit manageable. Like so. I hit an alt print screen and I come over here to my screen and I just hit Control V. And there's how I can kind of save the information of my initial dwarves, and I won't go through all of them here, but I do that so I have a quick reference, because I'm not going back into the game a lot of times initially until I get everything kind of hammered out. And what ends up happening is I come down here and then I can actually start the story. All right. And basically it's kind of like an ad lib idea here where I can go like this. For the glory of the great mountain home, the anvil of growths, the mighty forge lord Ast mind-whipped in honor of the late queen, Zephon Sealfrills, and here's our group name comes in, the Neth Bakar have been tasked with, and now we come back to the Legends viewer and kind of get an idea of why are we up here? Why are we at that particular location where we're at? And if we look here, we're kind of in this area, and that would be probably hedging. We've had to cut through goblins and humans. I would say probably we're trying to help the humans against the Ferric elves. Tasked with establishing a fortress near the ferric elves of, and we can come back over here and we can kind of, the fence of pointing. Fence of pointing. Of pointing. Fortress near the ferric elves of the fence of pointing to aid the humans of, and while the grammar is terrible, it's kind of just to help keep things, the distant confederation. The distant federation. Danger abounds with the goblins of the fleshy monster. Fleshy monster putting pressure on the mountain home as well as the distant Confederates. There, so we can see the goblins are south enough, and then we got the big confederations here, and the distant confederation. Kind of got that there, and we can kind of get an idea of how we're going to go about this and things of that nature. Now, the umbral jungles lay to the south of, and now we come back over here and we got to figure out what this big chunk of rock up here is for. And I think actually we can see that here in sites, regions. I mean, there's the whole region list here, and we can kind of assume that this area up here has got something. So, back, let's look here and see if we can find out something else. We also have underground. We have a whole slew of different things that we can kind of be looking at. Summary, show map. So we've got a variety of different things we can kind of try to get into and see, but a lot of times you end up having to go back to the game itself and kind of pull these informations out. We'll pull this mountain range out a little later and take a look, but great mountain. Alrighty here. Near the shore of the rabble of bases stream. And then we've got our main leader, whose name we pulled out earlier, which is Mezbuth. Mebzuth has found the ideal location for the Caddo and the Catalinash fortress. So there we are, and that's kind of, we've taken a long time to get to this point, but now it's pretty straightforward as you're going to go and play. What I end up doing then is, and you'll see this template, from the fortress of Catalinash on behalf of, insert leader or mayor here, I present the mighty Forge Lord Asp Mind Whipped the following summary of the year. And then what I end up doing is I end up chronicling what has happened in that year that's happened. And I kind of keep that running story going. And then if it's interesting enough, you end up posting it to, like, you know, the Reddit groups or your forum or your friends or whatever. And by doing that until those first 7 are all dead is usually when I cut off. it just makes you more engaged in how the story goes about and how to really kind of get into the gameplay and pay attention to smaller details. It kind of forces you to pay attention to what's going on in the world and around you, and just tends to make it a little bit more interesting. So that's basically the gist of how I end up playing. Then I just go in and I play it like most people normally do, except every year, at the end of the year, in the winter, I just end up adding to this Word doc and tracking the more notable things that have happened. And depending on how much you play, it depends on how interesting of a story you end up with. And sometimes you have an incredibly boring fortress, and sometimes you have an incredibly interesting fortress. And it really depends. So it depends on how you play and what the results are. And if I can dig up one of my older ones, I will post that and put that in a link in the comments below, or however that works. I'll get around to it. But if I can dig up one of my older ones, I'll get you a link to it, and so you can kind of read how that plays out in the long run. But otherwise, have a great evening, and don't do stupid crap on the internet. Everybody's watching.